Hello and welcome to Code and Pixels with Kelly and Adekunle. Today we'll be chatting with Karl Koch about design engineering at DuckDuckGo and design engineer XYZ.
Thanks, Kelly. As you mentioned, Carl is a senior design engineer at DuckDuckGo. Hey, Carl. Thanks for being on the show. How are you going?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So let's get started with the first question. Can you talk about your career path and how you got to where you are today?
I can. Do you want the long one or do you want the short one? Gets a bit wild.
Let's do the medium version.
The medium version. All right. Okay, so basically, I started out. I did fine art at uni and kind of found myself a bit lost with what do you turn a fine art degree into. So I was kind of friends with a lot of graphic designers who were graduating off and doing the kind of more typical join an agency and figure out what graphic design is path. And I kind of told myself that wasn't really for me because I did fine art and that wouldn't be okay, wouldn't be allowed. So I ended up kind of falling into account management, and going from fine art to account management was like a weird, complete like parallel world. And I would say it's not for me. But in the process, I kind of learned about digital design, learned about UX, learned about like building for the web and delivering products. And so that kind of took me down a path of like, how do I turn that into a career? I'm kind of interested. And so I got the opportunity working at some small agencies to basically just try those things out. Try a bit of design, try a little bit of this sort of UX thinking, try a little bit of HTML, like just doing all these things that I'd kind of touched in different ways beforehand, but not in a job. And then through that, basically managed to kind of build up a sort of portfolio, and then winged it, joined a startup in renewable energy and said I was a designer and they believed me, and then essentially became a design engineer because they needed someone who could build a prototype. And so I learned Vue.js to build the prototype. And then once that all kind of didn't work out because of startups and COVID, I ended up joining a different startup and learning Swift UI when that was brand new. And so then I ended up doing design and iOS coding, and then just kept taking that forwards, learning more, learning React, learning other front end frameworks, and kind of fell in love with this combination of building an idea from like concept to creation and delivery, and I guess being able to do that before AI could do that all for me.
I love that. I think you're the first person that said account management. I think as a background, I was doing economics and fine arts, and people were like, what are you going to do with that? And I was like, I don't know, I'll figure it out. But, I think both those degrees helped me some way or shape in my career. So I'm kind of grateful for that.
Yeah, I'd agree. Like, I think what I've noticed now anyway, at DuckDuckGo, we work very differently to a lot of organizations. And one of the expectations of anybody here is that you design, you don't design, you DRI. So you like are responsible for any project that you work on. And so having that kind of account management background actually has ended up coming kind of full circle and paying off, because it's given me that knowledge and skill set of like, how do you run a project? How do you manage stakeholders? How do you deal with like things that come up that maybe typically as a designer or an engineer or a design engineer, you may not encounter. So it's kind of like worked out nicely for me, but I wouldn't have predicted it going in.
Love that. Love that. I'm wondering, like, what's your day-to-day look like at DuckDuckGo?
So I guess I'm uniquely positioned in that I'm the only design engineer. I created the discipline at DuckDuckGo. We didn't have it beforehand. And it all kind of came about just through the fact that I had those skills, even though I was hired as a designer. So my day to day is slightly different to other people's, I guess, with that in mind. I'm more likely to run projects end to end, as in being the sole person responsible for every aspect of a project. Typically, although anyone can like DRI a project, so be the directly responsible individual, more often than not, they're going to be pulling in lots of other people and just basically managing it and then leading a single part of it. For me, I'm across the whole spectrum, which is a blessing and a curse. Some days I love it, and some days it has me pulling my hair out because I'm trying to figure out how to measure some pixels for something to be able to verify if it was successful, and I have no idea how to do it. But you learn a lot throughout that process. So a typical day for me is spending a lot of time in Asana. We use Asana for project management. And so I'll be doing a lot of, I guess, back and forth in there, trying to figure out the details of like, what is the project we're running? What are we trying to achieve? What's the kind of ins and outs of this? And that can be like high level strategic decision making, or it could be like really low level, like what pixel parameter do we need on this thing to be able to tell us that this was successful or fails, right? And because of the work I do, I work on a module called Search Assist, which is our answer to Google AI overviews. So it's like a little AI answer that appears on the search engine. And the inherent problem I have with that, which is what probably stresses me most days, is if we do our job right, nobody does anything. You just search for a question, you get an answer, and then maybe you close the browser tab. And so from a signal perspective, there's just nothing there. Like, I'm like, what did you do? Nothing. Okay. Then we succeeded, I guess. Like I have to try and make a lot of assumptions from trying to look at all these other signals. And because we're privacy respecting as a company, it makes it even harder. So I would say a lot of my time is like actually at the fringes of things. So although I need to design and build an idea, it's the kind of the bits before that, which is working out like, how do we need to build this experiment so that it's going to be successful? And then how do we evaluate success afterwards? They're the two biggest, like the hardest parts of my day on a project. The actual design and implementation side is the fun bit, but also the bit that kind of is like less of my day these days, I think, especially with AI tools kind of accelerating a lot of the workflows there. It's we spend less time in the fun bits. So I'm going to try and pull them back, try and do more, get in Figma more and getting the code tools more, I think.
Yeah, I can see how that can be a challenge. Almost silence is golden in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So, Carl, you defined this role. You started as a designer and you created this design engineering role, and you're the only design engineer. And I was wondering, what were some of the biggest early challenges you faced when you were creating the role and kind of building that cross functional trust between design and engineering and any other partners you work with?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting aspects of it was that it kind of came to me initially. So I had been designing some things. We have a product called DuckAI, which is like a private wrapper around popular chat models for AI tools. And we wanted an early prototype for it. And one of my colleagues was like, hey, look, I know you can build stuff, and I know you've been building stuff in side projects. Would you be interested in helping me to kind of like evaluate building a prototype of this AI chat tool so that we can kind of get it in front of people and basically get the green light to build it? So I went away and just mocked up a quick prototype with the Vercel SDK and like our design system, and just basically figured out like, what does a chatbot look like that looks like our design system, that is like DuckDuckGo. And we put that in front of some stakeholders. I shared a Vercel link, got shot down because I hadn't gone through the official channels and approval processes and all of this stuff because I had no idea. But there was like enough in that I think our CTO saw the kind of the value of being able to iterate from this conceptual, like, what if we did it, to here's a prototype that everyone can rally around to then approve and build out the actual final product. So he basically gave me the challenge of like, you've done this before, so for your next project, when you design it, I want you to try and prototype it, but using our code base. And so I was like, okay, cool. Got onboarded, did all of that. And as soon as he said prototype, my head said ship. because I was like, this is, prototype's not enough. Let's get it out there. And I kind of wanted that, like, I don't know, I guess I wanted to push myself a little bit further. So I ended up doing that through a lot of pain and hard work. We ended up figuring out, like, okay, how do I design this? How do I actually build this and ship it? Shipped it. It was successful. So next project comes around and he's like, do it again. So I was like, okay. So I did it again. And that went on for about 6 months, I think it was. So it was like 3 projects, something like that I ran. And then kind of by the end of that, I was looking at this thinking, if I'm just going to keep doing this and I'm just a designer, like, does that really make sense internally? Like, how do people, if I go to like a different objective with a different person leading it, are they going to know how to work with me and how to like deploy me effectively, I guess? And so, well, and then also, I guess, like the ego side of it was like, well, I kind of want my LinkedIn to make sense. So like, let's call it what it is. And so I had a discussion and we basically spent a bit of time internally figuring out, like, what does that role look like? How do we kind of spec it out, scope it out so that it sits alongside design and engineering, but doesn't feel like it's one or the other. And then I guess alongside that, I was spending tons of time within front end channels, building trust with the kind of front end engineers to be like, I know these things too, like jumping in, just like silly things, like jumping in on conversations where someone's talking about like, oh, I've seen like Radix and React Aria, like which one's better? And I'm like, I've got an opinion. So I jump in and have an opinion. And then suddenly someone's like, well, why don't you go and evaluate it for us? So I was like, okay, cool. And I think like all of those acts all together got us to a point where it made sense internally to like put a name on it. And so thanks to a lot of effort on like our people team side and like just a bunch of my team, we were able to figure out like a role for this. And then even more so, they kind of took it away and said like, let's actually make this a hireable role, although we're not hiring for it at the current time when we did that. Like, let's do all of the work to make it so it can be a hireable role in the future. And so now I'm in the position where I've been proving it out for the past couple of years. And I think like we're seeing the value internally enough that I'm going to start having the opportunity to potentially build a team around this, eventually. Fingers crossed, I guess. Yeah. But that's the work I'm doing now, is scoping out like, what does it look like? How do I go from me to multiple me's, and like how do we deploy us effectively across the organization to actually bring more value?
It sounds like the culture is really open and inviting, that you weren't saying, oh, I have ideas, and they go, who are you? And
thankfully not. Yeah,
that's great. So DuckDuckGo is a browser. I think that's a little different than what most of our listeners have worked on. What are some things that people might not know about working on something like a browser from either a design or engineering perspective?
Yeah, well, we've grown as a company from just being a search engine originally, like Google, to now we have our own private browsers. So you've got desktop browsers across Mac OS, Windows, not yet Linux. And then we've also got mobile browsers. So you've got iOS and Android. And all of our browser products are native. So one of the things that I guess we have a lot of challenges with just generally is that, unlike a lot of companies, we don't have like a decision around like, okay, we're going to use React and React is going to power all of our tools. And so all you need to know is React. And so if you want to work on the browser for mobile, or you want to work on like the desktop browser or the search engine, it's all the same language. Our challenge is that it's not at all. Everything is built specifically for the platform we're working on. So Windows is C++, I think, if I remember correctly. Mac OS and iOS are both Swift, but with a lot of legacy code too. Android's Kotlin, and our browser our search engine, is React, but not all of it, because it's existed since 2008. So some of it is just like real old JavaScript. And so one of the things I think is challenging for a design engineer is, depending on what objective you end up on here, like you can end up being I guess, deployed in the React code base. You could end up in like iOS code and Swift. You could be sat trying to look at Kotlin and make sense of it. Like, depending on what the objective is you're working in, you could be across a lot of things. And I predominantly work directly within the actual search engine itself. So I work in React code. But I have contributed to the iOS code base. I've put some contributions forwards that I've been thinking about for macOS too. And so I guess I'm fortunate. I had that weird exposure in the early days where I got kind of thrown into randomly learning Swift UI at a company, and then having to learn React after that, because actually that's ended up paying off again. Just like the account management thing. Here we've got these like mixture of code bases, and so having more generalized knowledge across multiple different frameworks and languages pays off. I think at most other companies, at least from the conversations I've had before, you're more likely to be deployed into like a React code base, right? And there's like consistency there of, well, it's React and React Native, and like those two things are close enough. And so it's a bit easier for somebody to be across everything. For us, it's a little bit more difficult for someone to have that broad skill set. So I guess I'm lucky, but then also I look at the Android code base and I have no idea what's going on. So
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part, because again, people always ask like, "Oh, do you do like iOS and that?" I was like, I don't know anything about that world. I wish I did, but it's like the web is kind of my home, and probably in the future I might dip my toes into like the other, like the native world. But I think it hasn't, the problem hasn't presented itself for me to kind of do that. But it's something that I wish I could do, and hopefully more design engineers can kind of do. But just to kind of shift gears, you created Design Engineer XYZ. I think it was late last year. I think I saw the launch, or was that
it's
like
been around
last?
a little bit longer, but yeah, I've only just like turned it into what it is. I built the domain, I think like 2 years ago. I put something on there, a bit more, and then sat with it. Didn't really do anything. And then, yeah, I'd just been having loads of conversations about it. And people were booking time with me who were either kind of moving into design engineering or were interested in design engineering. And I was having the same conversations over and over with those people about like, I'm a designer, but I want to become a design engineer. Like, what do I do? And then every now and then I get an engineer saying like, hey, I'm an engineer, but I want to be more of a design engineer because I really love design and I've been trying to do stuff in that space. And I kept giving people the same advice, and then they'd be like, oh, so what course should I do? And then I sort of like have to stare blankly at them like, I mean, it depends, what do you want to learn? And then, it just got difficult. And so I figured like there's just an opportunity there, I guess, for like, how do you build something that bridges the gap that comes from a kind of place of teaching people the fundamentals that will allow them to go from their knowledge in one space to having enough knowledge in the other space to be able to combine those two things and do more with it. And that's what I tried to build, basically. So it's like the goal is that there's these different tracks you can go down. You can go down a design track, which means you're like an engineer that's trying to build out design skills. You can go down the engineering track, which is a designer who's looking to build more engineering skill. There's what I call convergence, which is like basically everything. So that's like the tool set for, even if you've got some knowledge in one domain or the other domain, like you don't feel like you've got strong enough knowledge and you just want everything. And then within those, you can kind of even break down into like just iOS engineering or just, I don't know, Android design. And kind of learn all of those principles and basics. And the goal was to like try and build something that was about getting people foundational experience or foundational knowledge, rather than trying to be a course that like gives you all of the latest about React or all of the latest on a specific framework or language, because those things become out of date so fast. And so I wanted it to be more of a like, what's HTML? Because most of the conversations I have with designers who are trying to transition into design engineering, they're like, I don't even know what a terminal is. And like someone's telling me I've got to open that and do something. Like, or on my team, the designers are like, where do my files live? And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, I don't understand. Like, where is this code? And I'm like, it's on your computer. And they're like, what? And so, it just made me realize there's so much like of a gap in people's knowledge that gets skipped over in most courses, and it just jumps straight to like, let's deploy an app. And you're like, well, okay. And so that was basically the goal with it, is like try and get people enough knowledge, but not too much knowledge.
Yeah, I love that. I that's one of the reasons why this podcast came to light, because a lot of people were like, "How do I do this?" And I'm like, and I keep on repeating myself. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna have a episode talking about it, and I'm just gonna shoot you an episode. And it's been very helpful because it helps. Like, I know some people like to read, some people like to do, and some people just want to listen to like people like talk about stories. And I think that's kind of the idea. And I love that how you were just kind of like, all right, I'm just gonna put this in one thing. And I love the idea of creating, like, focusing on the foundations, because I feel like these days people are like, all right, like React, and I was like, well, no,
Yep.
that, like, it's the hot thing right now, but the foundations is going to kind of carry you, because sometimes you might have to build something without any framework. Are you able to kind of do that and whatnot? And I think it's more of like a mindset, and we have all these tools in place to kind of help us kind of build things out. So I love that you're kind of focusing on that foundational aspect of it. Cool. And yeah, we were talking about tools, and I'm wondering, like, you mentioned AI. I'm wondering, like, with the increase of the AI tools, how do you think it's going to change design engineering? Is it going to make us more valuable? Is it going to make us obsolete? I'm just wondering your thoughts around that.
I think the role's dead. We're done. Nah, not at all. Yeah, I think about this a lot, actually, because I work on an AI tool using AI at work. So it's like it's a bit of a, I can't hate on it. And I think actually like AI has been really useful. And what I've found with AI tooling generally is the AI is only as good as your knowledge. And I think for a lot of people, they'll look at it and think the opposite and be like, oh, no. But I can just prompt an LLM and it will build everything for me. And I don't need to know anything. And actually, for like, if you actually ask most people, it's like, yeah, maybe you'll get 80% of the way there. And then that final like 20%, 10% or whatever of trying to get this thing done, you'll be tearing your hair out, burning through tokens, because it's gone in a loop in like the wrong direction. It starts undoing what it's done because the context window's gone. Like, there's just so many things. And often the problem comes down to the fact that people just don't know how to ask for what they actually want. There we go. And that comes down to a lack of knowledge. And I found that, like, if you understand how something truly works, you can say to it, hey, like, oh, I've noticed here, the problem is actually that you've missed like a parameter in this particular thing, or, oh, you've put a use state inside of a use effect, which is like causing a super weird re-rendering that's like bugging out. And this is bad. Like, you don't need this. And more often than not, you kind of solve the problem a lot faster. And so I use AI a lot. Like, it's a directive at the company for us to leverage it, but not in the sense of like, and now you are no longer responsible for like having any skill, just like trust the AI. Like, it's very much a case of like, use it to better yourself and to speed yourself up in those areas that maybe you typically would spend a lot of time burning through like weeks of iteration. And then that gives you, like, I guess, more space. I found especially like more space to explore in the design phase, but also in the implementation phase, caring about the details and being able to spend less time kind of thinking about like, oh, what parameters do I need specifically in this thing? And like, how am I going to like segment all of my code, and think more about like, what is the finesse that I can put between these two state changes that's going to make this thing feel really delightful to use? Or, what about this extra bit of visual polish that normally like, we'd cut off the end of a project because there's not enough time for it, but now I've got a week. So like, actually, I'm going to put the extra time in to make this thing look as good as it can or feel as good as it can. and polish the edges, And I think that for me is where AI has been a game changer in terms of like going from zero to shipping a product with like a million MRR, like everyone wants to talk about on like social platforms. I don't think that's so true.
Yeah, I was gonna say like you still want to guide it because a lot of people are like, oh, I'm just gonna prompt in and ship it. I'm like, and
Mm-hmm.
usually do the whole dance where it's like, hey, like, do you need this? And they're like, oh yeah, you're right, you don't need this. I was like, wait a minute, I thought you should know all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of like you mentioned, where it's like you still need to guide it, but also it'll optimize the stuff where you can kind of focus on that polish aspect because it's helping you kind of build things much more quickly. So
Yeah. Yeah. I remember the early days where people were shipping API keys in the front end because they just had no idea what was going on. So dangerous.
I mean, you say early days. I mean, I think that happens now
Yeah,
too.
probably still does, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. I've seen some bad things. People getting burnt for like 10K a month on people just finding the API key and just rinsing it. So, ouch.
So, Carl, as we wrap up, we have one last question. Let's say someone is trying to be a design engineer. What's some advice that you would give them as they're getting started?
So I think sort of touched on it a little bit. I think learning the foundational principles, not necessarily from my course, don't want to like, try and oversell it, but just in general, understanding the basics behind the particular aspects of design and engineering that you're going to be working on, I think is super important. Um, I think depending on which direction they're coming from, if it's like somebody who's a designer that's looking to kind of build the extra skills in engineering or the opposite, I think it's important to remember that the skills that you already have are super valuable and you need to continue to evolve and build on those too. Like don't suddenly be like, okay, well, I know enough about engineering. I'm going to learn some design stuff and now I'm suddenly good enough. Um, I think you kind of have to see it as as double work, which I think is again, it's a blessing and a curse. Like you've got to stay on top of two different industries. You've got to stay on top of two different ways of working. But I think when you get it right, like you can develop enough skill and knowledge in both areas that you can sort of just pick up the bits that you need as you need them from either side, and you just kind of keep pushing forwards. But really, it comes down to just caring deeply about how something gets built, why it gets built, the way it gets built, and trying to follow something from conception through to creation and wanting to care about all of that. And that means, unfortunately, having to care about things that are maybe like outside of your comfort zone or outside of your normal area of interest. But that's what makes it fun. You get to be the one person in the organization who can pick up something from somebody's brain and then put it into production. And I don't think anyone else has that opportunity.
I think you brought up an excellent point. It's a slippery slope of going into another area and then suddenly you're like jumping in too far into that area and you've lost a sense of almost who you once were. And I
Mm.
think bringing up balance is a great point. And it's
Yeah.
hard, right? You mentioned like you have to keep tabs on two things. I think it's easy to just want to go all in almost on the unknown. But I
Yeah.
love that you've grounded it back to where no, it's not one or the other, it's both, and that can be exhausting.
Yeah. I mean, I found it like it was almost a case where before we organizationally figured out like what a design engineer is, I essentially became a free front end engineer that didn't exist beforehand, right? And so suddenly I started to drift into these projects and I was looking at them like, where's the designs part of this? And they're like, oh, there isn't one. It's just like a pure implementation task. And I'm like, okay. Like, I'll help you out this time. And then that happened a little too often, and we were like, okay, I think we need to we need to codify this into like a document and then communicate that. Um, that's also a risk I see with a lot of organizations is that a design engineer gets just deployed as like a front end engineer that's kind of good at design. It's like it's different to that, but that's okay.
I think that's a good reminder to advocate for yourself if you find yourself in these types of tricky
Yeah,
situations.
I think so. And I think documenting it and having that document as a kind of source of truth is super critical. Like being able to point to a thing and say, this is what this job means. And, like in my case, it's majority design with an engineering piece on the end. And so if a task or a project is not, it's the opposite, it's more engineering focused, like I have a document to point to turn that down and say, I'm not good for this, and here's why. And over time that builds up and people then get to learn, like, okay, so this is like looking at your past history, like these projects are where you're really good and these other ones are not for you because we don't, it doesn't make sense for your skill set. And then you kind of build up a repository of like what that means.
That's great advice. I love that. Do you have anything you want to plug or anything, anyone or anything you want to shout out?
uh I'll plug my course, I guess. I probably shouldn't I? That'd be a good use of this time. So yeah, I will plug my course. I'll send a code over that we can include in the description for the podcast and everything, so people can get 10% off any of the courses that they choose to pick up. But other than that, go and advocate for yourself. Be a design engineer. Build the role internally. Do what you need to do. And if you want to talk about it more, you can book time with me for free on my website, and I can talk to you about your specific cases.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Karl, for joining us in today's conversation. This was fun.
We want to thank you for tuning into this episode. For more content, feel free to explore our previous episodes on codeandpixels.fm. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to connect with us on social media at Code and Pixels FM. Y'all have a great day.